Okay, so I'm Craig Pay. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak here today. 3D printing is quite a passion of mine. I've got 8 slides here, but what I'm not going to be doing during the presentation is telling you how you should 3D print. There's quite a lot of opinions out there about that. All I can tell you about is my own experience, and it's quite a small slice at that, and then you can make up your own minds. So, first of all, so I work in the IT industry. That's kind of why I'm here. Well, it's why I actually came to the last tech talk. I've worked in the IT industry for about 20 years or so. I'm currently working as a cloud consultant specializing in Microsoft Azure solutions. Bit of a kind of disclaimer, really. I do have some civil engineering experience before I joined the IT industry. So I can use CAD a bit. I did back then, and we'll come to that in a couple of slides on from now. But I have no job experience when it comes to 3D printing. It is just a hobby. So the what? Have you all guessed what this is so far? I don't know. Anyway, okay. Right. Okay, so this is a replica of a droid called C2B5 from the film Star Wars Rogue One. Whenever people see this for the first time, there's usually 3 common questions that get asked. So I've got those up on the screen here. So the first thing is, that's really nice. Does it move around? Does it make noises and so on? And yes, it does do that. There's an Arduino board inside here, and some of you may have spotted the Xbox controller on the bottom, on the floor there underneath the droid. The actual motors are electric scooter motors, so the same motors that you would get in the little kids' ride-on toys. And there's a custom code base running on that Arduino that I did not write, just to be clear. Okay, so how long did it take to build? That's the other most commonly asked question. 9 months to create what's called a static prop. So that is printed, glued, finished, painted, and then about another 6 months to get it motorized and moving around. And then the other question is, how much did it cost? This is kind of a difficult question to answer. So I printed some other bits and pieces with the printer. This was really where I thought, I'm going to challenge myself here. And so the cost involved in producing it off the printer, kind of difficult to work out because I made a lot of mistakes. I was learning a lot about 3D printing at that point. And I was also going through quite a lot of, almost like a prototyping situation where I would print a piece, fit it wouldn't quite fit. I'd go back, redesign it, print it again. So next time around, that cost would probably be lower. So £500 or thereabouts. That's just materials. That's not including the cost of the printer. But difficult to actually kind of get an accurate estimate for that. Now, the electronics and drive systems actually make it move. That I actually sat down, because of this, coming along to this talk, I've never actually worked out how much I actually spent on this in total. And I thought, yeah, it's probably just like another 500 quid or so. So I sat down with a spreadsheet and started working out. And I thought, right, okay, this is adding up. And I should have known it would be a higher amount. There's a battery inside here, and just that's the most expensive item. And that's £250 just for it's like a lithium-ion battery. Quite a big, heavy-duty one. So total cost for getting it moving, £1,500. That's, again, there's some prototyping in there, so that would probably be a bit cheaper on another pass with another droid, another project. So how did I get started? This might be how you get started. I'm not sure, but this is how I got started. So there's a file type, STL files. That is the common type of file that people use when they're 3D printing. It's a file type that describes an object as a series of lines and edges and vertexes 3-dimensionally. So that's pretty universal. If you're going to be doing 3D printing, you're going to be almost certainly dealing with STL files at some point. And there's a website, Thingiverse. So Thingiverse, it's like the Amazon of the 3D printing world, except it's free. So there's a load of designs on there that there's great community behind Thingiverse. They're uploading files, they're sharing them. The files are available on there to download. Generally speaking, they're all released under Creative Commons licensing, so you can download them, print them for your own personal use. A lot of people tend to take those designs and they might what's called remix them, so they might edit them, make changes, maybe improvements, and then upload them back to Thingiverse. So there's a great community on there. I found a really accurate set of files for R2-D2 on there, scaled down to 1/10. And then I used a software package called Blender, to simply scale those up, and then the real work started, where I was having to slice it up and produce all the various smaller parts that you produce on the printer. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend, I mean, Blender is many things. Actually, I use it for doing CAD design, so taking a three-dimensional object and editing it. And I've done some of my own designs there from scratch as well. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's a little bit funky, so there's a lot of keyboard shortcuts. You need to get, after a while, your muscle memory kicks in, and you kind of, I've got used to using it now. I'd probably recommend Fusion 360 instead of that, but I like Blender. It's free, it's open source. Again, there's great sort of community support for it as a piece of software. So, which printer? Okay, so over on the left-hand side there, we have a Wanhao CTC. That is my first ever printer, bless it, now retired. So the numbers that you see underneath there, the 220 by 150 by 150, that's the build volume. So a bit like with a normal paper printer, a 3D printer, there's an extra dimension, not just X, Y, there's a Z there as well. So the 220 is, in that case, with that printer, how wide the print bed is. And then the 150 is depth, and there's another 150, which is the height. That's the biggest volume you can go to. Cost of that printer, this is a cheap entry-level printer. It's actually a clone of another printer. I bought it on eBay, £250. It's no longer available. It has a rep for being unreliable, and that rep is pretty accurate. I've pulled my hair out so many times with that printer. There's wires hanging out at the side of it, all kinds of things. So it's done a pretty good job. I actually started printing this droid thinking this is going to kill the printer, and it just about kind of survived to the end of it. The printer on the right, that's my new printer. So I actually built this about a month ago from a kit. This is a Prusa Mark III, and it is lovely. Oh, it's like a Rolls Royce in comparison with my Wanhao printer. Much more reliable, much higher print quality. If you look at the numbers, the volume isn't that much bigger. It's a little bit bigger, and it does allow me to do a few kind of extra things that I wasn't doing before. But then there's a price tag attached to that as well. So the kits, that's £700. And you've got to build that yourself, so you can actually buy them pre-built from the supplier if you want instead. But kind of building it is part of the, for me, kind of part of the joy of understanding how it works, and they do break. So you're kind of better off building them actually, because then you know how to fix them later on. So if I was recommending a printer, I would recommend the Prusa, but there's obviously a kind of a price tag actually attached to that. There's lots of printers out there. So, the build process itself. So, in the last slide, I mentioned build volumes, 220 by 150 by 150. Now, this is clearly not 220 by 150 by 150. So, if you're working on a 3D printing project and the item that you're printing is larger than your printer, obviously you're going to have to do something about that, break it up into parts. So, depending on the materials you use, you've got different glues out there. This is a very large project, so it had to be split down into a lot of smaller parts. This is I've listed here that I think there's over 200 separate pieces. That's just a wild guess. I have to be completely honest. Again, because when I was building this droid, I was learning a lot about the process. I didn't keep a tally of how much material I used, how long it was taking to print each part, and how many parts there even were. There's a lot. So it could be 300 or 400. I have no idea. When I come around to do my next project, I'll keep a note of every single part. The dome is an example I've given here. So in the top right-hand corner there, you see Blender, and I've highlighted a few pieces from the model that was actually printed. And there's a photograph. In fact, that's the first photograph I ever took of this project when the first 4 parts came off. So this dome that you see on the top here, there's actually 3 layers to this. And then each layer, the bottom layer, there are 8 pieces, kind of like, not quite pizza slices, but segments. They're all glued together. And then there's another layer with another 8 pieces. And then there's a final layer on top with 4. Now, that's just the black. The silver parts in this, they're all printed separately as well, just for the ease of finishing it, sanding it, and then also painting the parts as well. So that's, what's that, 16? That's 20 pieces for the dome itself, and then another 8 for the silver bits. You then look at the rest of the droid. The main body, that's 5 of those layers with 8 pieces per layer. And then when you look at all the silver bits, very often the silver bits are even broken down into multiple parts. There's some vents on the front there. When I first printed those out, they didn't come out so well. I thought, it's going to be really fiddly to get the sandpaper in there. So I broke them down and broke them down and broke them down. Classic example of me going through like a prototyping process to get the parts printed off. And so those vents, there are probably 6 or 7 parts just within each vent, because it's easier to do that, lay them all out, sand them all individually, and then glue it together like a bit of a kit. So quite complicated. This is a big project to 3D print. why on earth would you do this? Because it takes a long time to build it, 9 months. Well, I'm a member of 2 charity costuming groups. I'm actually wearing the livery for one of those, UK R2 Builders. I'm also a member of the 99th Garrison. But as I've said, if you're going to start a project, anything like this, whether it's to do with costuming, droid building, whatever it is, find a group of people, join that before you buy anything, and you can learn a lot, save yourself a lot of time and money beforehand. So what do we do? So UK R2 Builders, 99th Garrison, we raise money for charity. So we might, in fact, I've named a few of the charities that we work with there. So the UK R2 Builders, we generally collect for the National Autistic Society or Meningitis Now, but many other charities besides. Likewise, 99th Garrison, our 2 most commonly, 2 kind of favourite charities are Dreamflight and Walking with Giants. But there are dozens of others. So, for example, I was out with the 99th Garrison this Saturday's gone at the Trafford Centre, and we're collecting for their 3 nominated charities. And what do we do? So we do everything from holding a bucket, no shaking, holding it only, in public places like shopping centres. We might be called into events. So Comic Cons is quite common for the event organisers to want to have, as well as the cosplayers there, they might want to have droids that are a little bit more advanced, so they give us a call and we go along there, and we might do some collecting for charities there. We do hospital visits, so we're not collecting at that point, we're just putting some smiles on faces. Very, very rewarding indeed. And then there's also film work. So we have an excellent relationship with Disney and Lucasfilm. The droids that you see in all of the new background films, they're supplied by our group. Not this droid. This is actually, because it's 3D printed, they're a bit kind of not sure about 3D printed props at the moment in the films. It's a very tough environment, especially when they're filming on location. So at the moment they use aluminium droids, which is the traditional droid build. But they are looking at 3D printing. There's some advantages, being able to quickly redesign and get something on set. The other thing you can't do is you can't use an Xbox controller on films. So it's too much RF interference going around, so you need to have a proper radio control set, maybe set to a certain frequency. So that's very rewarding, and to think that I'm knocking around with guys at the weekend who their droids are in the film and their names are on the titles is mind-boggling, to be absolutely honest. And the other main reason is it's an awful lot of fun. All of these things that we do, the people that we meet, members of the public, actors that we meet, events that we go to, it's kind of crazy, but it's a lot of fun. It's fantastic. I wouldn't give it up for the world. So... Right, so I actually have in my slide set that I prepared for this an additional 3 slides which I put to the back. When I actually share this in the discussion thread, which won't be till at least tomorrow now, I'll re-include those 3 slides. There's things like materials that you can print in, shopping lists, just to show that most of the items that you put into this droid are readily available from your eBay, Amazon, online, the usual places. If you want to get in touch, grab me. I will be driving him around in the interval. You can also grab me on Facebook. There aren't very many Craig Pays in the world. I know there's another one in Canada, and I think there's one other globally, so you're probably going to be able to track me down. Track me down on Facebook if you want the kind of silly weekend version of me, or if you want the slightly more sensible version on LinkedIn. And I'll just say this. If I can print a droid on a pretty awful budget printer, and I can then assemble it on my dining table, which that's literally what it's sat on just there. Anybody can do this, okay? This is an accessible hobby. It will take you a lot of time and maybe a little bit of money, but anybody in this room has already got the skill set to be able to do that if you're just feeling enthusiastic. That's all, thanks. Oh, questions, sorry. Yes. Okay, so it's funny you should mention that. A friend of mine, she's got an R2-D2 and it's got a water pistol built into the front of it. Yeah, I mean, we actually have to be careful about those kinds of things because these actually get MOT'd within our group, and each one of these has got PLI insurance. So because if you run into a member of the public at speed with one of these, especially the aluminium ones that weigh like 60k, then, anyway, so you've got to be insured for it. So I have thought about putting a Nerf gun on one of these things, actually. I would quite like that. And the next droid I'm going to build might have a bit of an aliens thing going on, so... How much does that Okay, so this is I was asked this question earlier. I can't remember who asked me this, and I don't know the answer to that. The problem is getting a set of scales that is big enough. I would probably need 3 scales and put, one on each foot. Each year we have an event, our group, in August, and they have scales there and they weigh each of the droids. At the moment, it's unknown. I think it's sort of 20k up to 30 kilograms maybe. I know the heavy ones, the aluminium ones, like my friend Darren's, his is 60 kilograms, but these are certainly a lot lighter than that. Right.
He still talks about 3D printing because he's given a tiny little robot that was printed off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do I start with that for him?
Okay, so this is a really good question because we get quite a lot of engagement from kids and families. And I do believe that with 3D printing, it's going to be akin to computers in the 1980s. Which is that back then, oh, you've got a computer, oh, how posh. Whereas now, we take it for granted so much, in fact, that now they're disappearing from houses and being replaced by mobile devices. So I think that you are going to get to a point where, at some point, everyone's got a 3D printer anyway. It's quite accessible. If you buy something like a Prusa, you're spending more money, but you are getting something that's less likely to break down. If you get one of the other printers that are out there that's less reliable, then you've got to have a bit of a calling to want to deal with that. I think the reliability of that is going to improve over time. How would you get started? I think you've just got to shop around for an entry-level printer, and you can download objects from Thingiverse. Your child is going to be really engaged about that, going to be going on there and searching. And then for me, the fact that they can see something that they can download or even actually make themselves on screen, and then especially when your child becomes older, I think that concept of having something virtual but then that becomes real is quite an incredible leap. Kids nowadays, they're quite au fait with technology where they're seeing things on screen, but to have that then brought out into the real world, I think that's bringing them back into some of the practical side of hobbies that certainly I had when I was a kid. I was making little things and painting lead miniatures and that kind of thing. It's a really practical hands-on skill. So what can you do? I would get a cheap printer, do your research, look at reviews, don't invest too much, the Prusa is probably a bit expensive, and then get on Thingiverse and get them keyed into downloading something. My youngest, actually, we looked for a little kind of floating robot of one of the games that he plays, and we downloaded it, printed it, and he's got that in his bedroom now.
I'm excited to hear you say that about the similarity between, say, the 80s home computers and
yeah.
It's exactly the same thought I've had in the many years. When my dad first did it,
yeah. The problem is deciding what to print on it. I kind of think that a lot of people buy them, print off a couple of those standard files. They have the little Martian or the castle or the robots, and then they're like, but what do I do with it? And having a project, and I do little odd jobs around the house. Every now and then I need some clips for that, and I'll just go into Blender and knock up a shape and print it off, and then I can fit some pelmet lighting or whatever it might be. But having something that you can aim at, and a hobby group, something like UKR2, is good because you can start low level. You don't have to start with one of these. I'm working on a mouse droid at the moment, which is the little square one that trundles around on the floor. So that might be quite a good entry-level project to get involved with. Or there's OpenRC, where you can print your own radio control car. Yeah. Or, to be honest, just whatever topics they're interested in, whatever shows they're watching. If you go into Thingiverse, there'll be an object there that you can print off, and for them to then actually own it. You don't even need to paint it, just print it and then own it. It's quite incredible for them.
What's the top speed, and have you tried racing?
Okay, so this is a good question because when I first printed this droid as that static prop, I didn't leave myself enough space in the feet, and I put these really awful motors in. And it was a bit of a running joke that it was so slow. We have like a big parade of troopers at the Comic Cons. He couldn't even keep up with that, which was quite sad, and everyone was like, oh no. And then next time around, I'd replaced the feet, put new motors in, and it was fantastic, but I kind of went too quick, went over a conduit and broke an ankle in it. So anyway, I don't know about the top speed, but we do have races, actually. So we have a little obstacle course that's got contact points in, and you start the droid in the middle, and you go through all these various gates, and you touch all these targets, and we actually have a leaderboard, and I've not been brave enough to put my droid into that, you have to be honest, because of the problems he's been having with his ankles. So I can't give you an answer for that, but I can tell you that they do get raced, and mine would lose because there are some fast droids out there. Sorry about that, not a very good answer.
Sorry, just building up on what Jennifer there said
Yeah.
about his child, but the thing that I find confusing looking at them is so many different element types. They seem to have different properties, like PLA and
Right.
those others. Is
Yeah.
there anything specific that you say we should be looking at depending on what sort of
It can be confusing. Okay, so part of what I wanted to do in this talk was get some of that information over. I can only do so much of that. It's interesting you mentioned PLA because that's the go-to material, and that's actually mentioned on one of my slides that this is printed in PLA. I have to be careful about that because at a certain temperature it will just start deforming and melting, so you can't leave it in a hot car. It smells wonderful when it's printing because it's cornstarch, basically sugar. So that compares with other materials like ABS, higher melting point, but kind of a bit unpleasant to have in I wouldn't want to have that in my house. So it's difficult because you'll get different opinions from different people, which is why at the beginning of this talk I said, look, I'm not going to tell you should do it, because you get 3 people who do 3D printing in the room and ask one question, you'll get 3 opposing answers. I personally would look at some reviews online, find an entry-level printer to start with. That's what I did with the Wanhao. I would print in PLA because it's accessible and the fumes aren't harmful and it's relatively easy to work with, and go from there. Okay, so again, that question's come up. So we have new members that join the group on a regular basis. And feel free to join a group if you want, even just to sort of see what's going on. And that was a question that was asked recently, which was, well, how about AI and make these things run around automatically? Well, of course, it would be doable. My mate Darren, who's got an R2, he builds all sorts of wacky stuff into his. It doesn't drive itself at the moment. And of course, there's a problem. If it was driving itself and it hit somebody or damaged something or was damaged, what would it's a very boring answer this, what would the insurance company say? I mean, we're kind of... Yeah, it doesn't cost very much to insure. It probably would do if it was autonomous. And there isn't the kind of standardization with autonomous driving that probably any insurance company would be happy with. So I think that will be a very special case. Somebody is going to do that at some point. It's only a matter of time. But not yet. I don't know of any yet. Any more questions? Yeah.
How does the legal side work with Disney and Lucasfilm regarding if you were to sell something similar or not?
Right. Okay, so that's a really good question. So one of the we have a good relationship, obviously, with Disney and Lucasfilm. Some of our people effectively are in the films, and so we don't want to ruin that. There's a very strict way of working with any property that the IP belongs to them. We've got a very good relationship with them. All the costuming groups do. But saying that, whenever we go to an event, there's paperwork that has to be filled out where especially if we're putting any collateral up that is branded by them, if we've got backdrops, for example, that has to be approved by Lucasfilm. So it's very seamless. I don't get involved in that, luckily, because it looks quite onerous. One of the deals that we have is that when you build one of these droids, they're not for resale. So it's literally, you build a droid and it's for life. We do part runs where certain components, members of the club might do something like they might even produce a whole dome, especially if it's aluminium, and they might do a run of 3 or 4 of those that then go out to other members. But people aren't building these or shouldn't be building them to sell them on whole. Saying that, it does happen. I disagree with it fundamentally. In fact, I disagree about that with regards anything to do with the costuming world, because I work on other costumes as well. The IP doesn't belong to us. We're borrowing it, and we have this brilliant relationship where those organisations, Disney and Lucasfilm, say, sure, take our IP and go off and raise money for charity. I think that's very generous of them. we don't want to ruin that relationship. So legally, as long as we behave ourselves, then we get to play with wonderful toys like this. And not selling on R2s, not selling on droids. That's part of the deal. So it's good. That's a really good question. Anyone else? I think we're done.